On today's episode, I bring up the 7 dimensions of wellness, and I talk about how they can increase our overall well-being. This is Rooted with Robert, reminding you to go out and breathe that beautiful air and embrace each moment you find yourselves in. Woo! What's up, Rooters? Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about the dimensions of wellness. And I want to point out that I've seen numerous sources where they've ranged from 5, 6, 7, 8 even dimensions. But today I'm only going to be talking about 7 dimensions because the ones that I'm going to talk about are the ones that I believe are the most important and the most kind of applicable. The other ones, like 8, include just like other topics like financial and stuff like that I believe are important, but that they also kind of coincide with some of these ones from 7 dimensions. Some of these other sources just kind of get more specific. I don't think that's always necessary. But real quick, I'm going to run through these 7. And these include physical dimension, your intellectual dimension, emotional, environmental, spiritual, social, and occupational. So the first thing I kind of want to say is keep in mind that everybody's different. There's always intervariability between everyone. So with this relating to the dimensions of wellness, some people are more inclined to be more balanced in one dimension over another. So whereas someone might be very well off intellectually, they might be suffering emotionally or physically or socially. And by suffering, I just mean that they're neglecting this dimension a little bit. Also keep in mind that these dimensions are important because when you balance them or reach near balance, then you create more harmony in your life. And that'll kind of it'll become a little more clear as I go on with the podcast, but just keep that in mind. The whole point is to kind of keep these dimensions balanced in our lives and be aware of our level, so to speak, of these dimensions in our life. So I want to start off with intellectual. And so this is basically like stimulating your brain, mental activities, and stuff like that. You could read a book, do some research, just solve complex problems. This is important because when you practice the intellectual dimension, you are practicing the mind, the brain, that aspect of our bodies. And kind of to retract a little bit, our mind, body, spirit are all connected. They're all interrelated. So you want to keep in mind and attend to each of those individual parts. So the intellectual dimension is a part of that mind component of that 3-part process. So, like I said, reading a book, just do anything stimulating for your mind. You ever just get really stimulated after you do something that kind of challenged you a little bit? That's a good practice of your intellectual self. And now if you're too intellectual, if you're skewed too much to the intellectual side, that's when you might be analyzing too much or kind of not, almost like lack of empathy a little bit, but it's not truly that. It's just kind of a consequence of thinking too much and not balancing, let's say, your emotional, your physical, and some of these other dimensions. And keep in mind, like, it's kind of like a formula, the way I see it. You have social plus occupational plus physical, whatever, as high points might equal this outcome for you. But if you plug in different dimensions in the formula, intellectual, emotional, environmental, as high points, they might make you feel another type of way. So it's all about being self-aware and kind of just understanding where you are on the spectrum of dimensions and just seeing where you can improve. So the next one I want to talk about is the emotional dimension. And this is basically our feelings, how we feel about ourselves, positive feelings, And this is very important because as with the intellectual, this is almost like an opposite. Emotional is kind of our bodily response to things, where our intellectual is our mental, how we think about things. And it's very important to balance the intellectual with the emotional, because otherwise you might be too emotional, acting too much on feeling, which can be very impulsive, or too intellectual, where you don't have enough feeling and cannot relate to a situation, or cannot relate to the importance of a situation because of its emotional basis. So this can be practicing emotions, confiding in a friend. If you're stressed, just talking to someone about it, to even just being aware of what you're feeling right now. Do I feel stressed? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel sad? Just being aware and giving them that acknowledgement to, hey, I'm feeling this type of way. That's okay, but you just need to acknowledge it, because when you start neglecting it, then it starts affecting your life in other ways. Physical is pretty obvious, kind of the food, nutrition, exercise, as well as drugs and alcohol, things that affect our physical body. And, obviously working out, eating better food choices, limiting our alcohol and other drug substances. These are all things of how we can improve our physical. And this is obviously important because our physical body is the one that ages. And in that sense, since it's also connected to the mind, a healthy body correlates with a healthy mind. So we always want to, in my opinion, the physical is kind of like the baseline. Like, always have your physical on point. Stretch out, massage, yoga. Always have this on point, because it's a good foundation to add the other ones onto it. Because, if you're feeling tense and you have pain, it's so hard to get into a more smooth rhythm with these other things. Next, and pretty, kind of common, I think at least it's understandable, is the social dimension. And this is our interrelationship with others, harmony in our families and friendships and stuff like that. And obviously we're human beings. I'm sure everyone has heard the fact that we are social beings. We are a very social animal, and not having a socially strong dimension can definitely lead to negative affect, like some sadness, maybe depression. And we kind of know how that relates to depression, because when you are depressed, you isolate more. You don't want to go out. You don't really want to talk to too many people often. So these are things to keep in mind, how things interrelate to outcomes, and trying to prevent them by keeping in a harmonious balance within ourselves before they get to that point. So the occupational it's iffy to me. I like it because it's practical. We have to work in at least our society, in our culture, the United States, because, as well as other countries as well, but we have to work to contribute to society as well as to make money, to provide for ourselves and our families. But the occupational kind of usually coincides with the vocational. You almost kind of want it. The goal is to find something that you find meaningful, that you have purpose in. You don't want to just go to a day job. However, I understand that some people are just stuck at that because they just need the money, and it's an opportunity that they have. But the ideal is to always choose a vocational route. You'll be the most fulfilled by the end of it, because you're doing something that you enjoy. And you might be making good money off it. So it's always a win-win. And, of course, you're contributing to society, which is the point of us working. We're supposed to contribute to the overall good. Now, the way that the system is set up might bias that contribution a little bit, because you have to go through laws and regulations and all that stuff. But for the most part, shoot for something that you enjoy doing. And if not, at least just be aware of where you are in this dimension. The last two I kind of left specifically for a reason, environmental and spiritual, because I kind of relate them a little bit together. Environmental, if you ever look into dimensions of wellness, you'll see a lot of the, recycling, picking up trash, limiting your pollution, limiting your water consumption, like via shower and brushing your teeth, stuff like that, which is very, very great and exactly what it means to practice this dimension. However, I want to point out that there's a deeper realm to the environmental, and that is the respect and appreciation of the sacredness of this earth, because we are guests of this earth, and this earth is providing us with life. So we need to respect that and have a reciprocity of giving back. Take care of the earth. And that's when you see these things like recycling, taking a shorter shower, picking up trash. It reflects this respect for the earth. And spiritual, I relate that because spiritual to me is sacredness and respecting that. And the environmental is kind of like, it's a gateway to spiritual, because when you're in nature, you just feel a different sense of stillness almost. And with a sense of stillness, it's easier to go into a spiritual experience, I guess you can say. This particular diagram that I'm going off of right now as kind of a basis point is speaking of spiritual as integrating one's belief and values with one's actions. It involves seeking meaning and purpose in human existence, which I do agree in. But spiritual is really the mind, body, spirit aspect, right? You want to make sure that is practiced. And spirit is hard because some people don't believe in it because we can't see it. However, I personally believe in a spiritual sense of life, that there's something outside of what we can see, what we can touch, but it is still within and around us that we can connect to. It's always there. It's all about tuning into it, tapping into it, and letting it flow through us as we soak up its energy. This could be practiced with meditation, yoga practices, all those very deep mindful practices, as well as I was mentioning earlier, spending time in nature, in the mountains, in the forest. And then while you're in nature, having that respect, having that stillness, having that loss of ego, that loss of identity that's strictly cultural, kind of environmental based, and environmental, I mean socially constructed type stuff like that. Spiritual is a great thing. So physical, spiritual, intellectual, and also emotional create a tight bond. But social, environmental, and occupational keep everything together as well. It kind of secures that bond, make sure it's stronger. So I've came across the dimensions of wellness a couple years ago, I believe. And, it's one of those things where you don't have to change your life completely, but you just need to be more aware of your life and just analyzing a little bit of how you're feeling. If you're really feeling off and anxious one day, kind of just like think of how your last week was, or 2 weeks, or your month, depending on the severity and longevity of your, certain dysfunction, or I don't want to call it dysfunction, but certain thing that's kind of tripping you up. And these dimensions kind of give it a label and a better concept of how to visualize and make it more practical into your everyday life, because there's always the deeper concept in each of these dimensions, but then there's the practical ways of utilizing it and increasing your own presence in each of these dimensions to create a bigger harmonious whole. So yeah, that's really it, guys, for today. I just really wanted to address this and bring it to your guys' awareness, because it's super important. And I know that if you start becoming more aware of it on a daily basis, you'll definitely benefit, or at least have new insight and perspective into your life. So thank you all for tuning in. to this episode of Rooted with Robert. And I just want to say thank you guys all for listening. I really do appreciate you. And please give me any feedback if you have any. I'm more than willing to listen to some suggestions. So please leave a comment, a like, hit me up personally if you know me. Anything. I greatly appreciate it. So have a great Sunday, everyone. Enjoy your time with family and friends. And peace.